every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
You can't handle the truth.
And welcome, folks. It's May 20th, 2019, a week before Memorial Day, and I will say this is Truth versus News Incorporated, and there's all kinds of...
Come on, you are fake news. Okay, you're fake news.
All kinds of fake news out there, and there's all kinds of news about drums beating, war drums beating and things here, and it's really a very critical time here. I got the most critical minds in America, James Spetzer, Scott Bennett, and Michael J., who are going to bring us the truth about what's really going on. So, Jim, lead on. Anything really significant, I guess?
Thanks, Don. We have a video showing this damaged Norwegian tanker emerging after alleged sabotage, but it's really trivial damage. This all appears to be completely contrived. Iran appropriately calls the tanker sabotage off the United Arab Emirates a false flag, says it expected such actions. On May 12th, 4 commercial ships were sabotaged near the UAE territorial waters in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf. Here's the location where it took place. The Strait of Hormuz, of course, is one of the most critical shipping points in relation to oil in the world. Here's where you can see graphs of the amount of traffic that takes place there. There were no injuries, no fatalities, no spills of hazardous chemicals or fuel. A statement said the carrying out of sabotage on commercial and civilian vessels and threatening the safety and lives of those on board is a serious development. It called on the international community to assume its responsibility to prevent such action by parties attempting to undermine maritime traffic safety and security. But that would not be Iran. In fact, here we have a UK general. No sign of increased threats from Iran or its proxies. Says, moreover, UK intelligence is in line with US intelligence on the matter, and implying this appears to be a political move by Pompeo and Bolton. The narrative of an increased threat posed by Iran and its proxies across the Middle East is being used to justify U.S. military buildup and a general escalation of tensions in the area. British Major General Chris Gika, however, has raised serious doubts. Major General Gika said there's been no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces despite the claims from U.S. officials, political appointees, I emphasize, mostly Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. Perhaps even more damningly, Gika says he does not believe there's any daylight between Britain's assessment of no increased threat and the assessment from U.S. intelligence agencies, drawing a demarcation between the U.S. officials, the political appointees who appear to be exaggerating or lying about the situation, and the serious intelligence sources. I was interviewed about it and reported that the sabotage operations against tankers near the UAE were a covert operation launched by Mossad and the CIA aiming to deceive the world. Iran was responsible for the attacks. I would now qualify that to say more probably this was Mossad acting in concert with Bolton and Pompeo to stir up the situation in the Middle East, where Iran has no interest whatsoever in provoking a war. This whole event reflects the political pitfalls for Donald Trump, testing his America First pledge. President Trump won the White House, pledging to wind down the nation's many foreign entanglements and put America first. But as his administration in recent days has sent mixed signals on the prospects of a military conflict with Iran, his campaign trail promise is being put to the test with the 2020 election approaching, the political pitfalls ahead for the first-term Republican president could be serious indeed. Scott.
Well, the United Arab Emirates, being the geographical location in which this incident occurred, indicates that it most likely, if it was done, was orchestrated by agents in the United Arab Emirates, which could have included Mossad. It could have included Saudi Arabia and UAE. I think the general consensus, of course, is that Iran would have nothing to do with any sort of activity of this nature. Just like they don't have anything to do with alleged assassinations in Europe that was done staged by MEK, and we know MEK pays John Bolton $50,000 to get speeches, as well as Rudy Giuliani and others. So MEK is a culprit. This whole Kabuki theater show is not becoming, it's not laughable anymore. It's becoming so offensive and disgusting because the lunatics in the asylum have gotten out and are in the levers of power trying to push us towards a war using this, once again, false flag Kabuki theater, Iraq 2.0. And it's blatant, it's odious, it's obvious. And it's like, did no one get the memo of the last 20 years except the American public and the world, where John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and these other idiots who seem to think that we're going to buy and swallow the regurgitated garbage of threats of weapons of mass destruction and threats this and threats that. It really is laughable, but it's also sad and dangerous. It's sad and it's infuriating in a sense, because I look at President Trump and I'm thinking all of these people are an expression of you, Mr. President. You are responsible for every word they say and every action they take and every expression on their face. They're not independent actors. They are part of your administration. And John Bolton is the most disgusting, hated man in America because of his getting us into the Iraq war. And Mr. President, you said you despised the Iraq war when it happened, and now you're embracing and hiring and paying the salary of a man who started it all. There's just this insanity, this schizophrenia, and we've been using this language, Jim, for over a year now, and other people are picking up the same language we've been using. So I think it's either a permutation of truth or people are listening. But I think this recent episode is really laughable. It's really a joke. It makes the president look bad because the Iranians are not going to back down. They're not going to quiver. They're not going to submit. They're not going to surrender anything. They're going to stand their ground. They're going to do it in a respectful way. They're not going to initiate reckless actions, but they're not going to bow down to anything. They may open up to dialogue and conversations and diplomatic relations, but they're not going to do it under the threat of force. And that seems to be the major miscalculation, that Trump thinks he's Ronald Reagan all over again. We don't have the internet, and he can engage in these great massings of American firepower. And that's going to be, the Empire Strikes Back with 1,000 starships over some little sand hut country with a sand people, and suddenly everyone's going to be terrified into submitting. That's not going to happen, because it's not just Iran, it's Russia, it's China, it's Turkey. And the only ones on our side are Israel and Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones with the agenda for this war. That's why the British said there's no threat from the Iranians. The British aren't going to get involved with this. You'd have chaos and civil revolution in Britain, because especially the Muslims that are in London, I don't think you're going to have it in Germany for precisely the same reason. And I think France is not going to do it either, because France has indicated a desire for closer political relations with Iran. So this whole episode looks bad. And it's a miscalculation, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But the more evidence that comes out of false flags, again, this could be, of course, an opportunity to jettison John Bolton and remove him. And I know we're going to talk about that later. But these people are responsible for all this war language and war rhetoric. It's very bad, and it also hurts the president in 2020, because now we hear Tulsi Gabbard saying the exact language that we've been saying. And she's saying all the right things. And if Trump doesn't say these things, then he's surrendering his cards, and he's going to lose the whole game, Jim.
I've invited Tulsi to come on to my show, Scott. Michael J.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Scott. That was excellent. I agree that John Bolton essentially is the female, rather the male version of Nikki Haley. They're both Zionists. They're both sociopaths. They're both anti-American because the policies that they've been promoting with respect to war would actually destroy America. But it is the agenda of the Israelis and the sociopathic Saudis. And we're looking at Mr. Trump actually beginning to recognize that something terrible has gone on, and we can't read his mind, but at the same time we can read certain things with respect to his attitude and his cautions. I believe that what's happening is that the American people are, by their alternative media and by their calling their representatives and by emailing the White House, or letting Mr. Trump know that Mr. Bolton and Pompeo the Hutt are not working in the American interest. They are essentially people that are taking advantage of Mr. Trump's desire to be a deal maker, desire to push real hard like he did with North Korea, and even that's backfiring. But the issue is Mr. Trump needs to begin to involve the American people even more and do an end run around the controlled media and his own staff around him, because his staff is infected with a moral disease called Zionism. Jim?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Michael J. Excellent points. We have Gareth Porter, John Bolton's nefarious plot for war with Iran. This guy's a really brilliant character. John Bolton has gotten away with a dangerous deception. The National Security Advisor's announcement Sunday that the Pentagon has deployed air and naval forces to the Middle East, which he combined with a threat to Iran, points to a new maneuver to prepare the ground for an incident that could justify a retaliatory attack against Iran. We have Pac Mache. Trump pushes back on war with Iran, but for how long? With some wonderful quotes. The ignorant warmonger masquerading as an American Secretary of State should be arrested for his impersonation of an American government official, Paul Craig Roberts, whom I regard as our nation's leading public intellectual. Every time the U.S. saves a country, they turn it into an insane asylum or a cemetery. Ed Gelin, Latin American author. It's a trick we always use in Europe. We stop criticism of Israel by bringing up the Holocaust. In the U.S., we call critics anti-Semitic. Shulamit Anon, a former Israeli minister, I've seen the video where she makes that description. Meanwhile, Jack Mullen, Israel demands a new war with Iran, the war to deliberately destroy America. He begins by citing Wesley Clark's report at the Commonwealth Club in 2007 that the plan was to take out the governments of 7 countries in the next 5 years, beginning with Iraq and Libya, ending with Syria and Iran. This is profoundly disturbing. In 1982, a research paper was released by the Association of Arab American University Graduates, Incorporated, entitled A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s, which refers to what is now called the Odin Yinon Plan, after the author's name. You may read more about the plan in the previous book. But in summary, it's really consistent with what Clark was reporting, where 9/11 was contrived to draw us into the Middle East to take out the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, to permit the expansion of Iran to occupy a greater portion of the Middle East, including large segments of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Syria, all of Lebanon, all of Jordan, and of course, the desire to confront the Persian nation of Iran, which hasn't played out because of the intervention of Russia and Iran on behalf of the Syrian people. Robert Steele, war on Iran, no. Fire Pompeo and Bolton, yes. He's an important commentator here who puts his finger on key issues. We had a lot of encouragement here, it appeared, Trump considering replacing John Bolton, which is what Jack Mullen was talking about. U.S. media reports suggest President Trump is considering replacing his hawkish NSA advisor, John Bolton, over his plan to push the United States toward military conflict with Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea. However, just today or yesterday, If Tehran wants to fight, that'll be the official end of Tehran, Trump warns. President Trump has warned Tehran that it would be the official end of the Islamic Republic if it threatens the U.S., just as Washington builds up its military presence near Iran under the pretext of national security. It's unclear what triggered the U.S. leader this time around, as Iranian officials have consistently said they want to avoid a military confrontation with the U.S. Earlier on Sunday, the commander of the elite Revolutionary Guard, Major General Hossein Salami, insisted that Iran only wants peace, but isn't afraid to fight America. I mean, it's a sovereign nation, it has the right to self-defense. Earlier, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei also said there'll be no war in the Persian Gulf. However, he added Tehran won't be involved in talks on a new nuclear deal with the U.S. The Trump administration has recently been increasing pressure on Iran with sanctions and a military buildup near its territorial waters. The U.S. and its allies began enhanced maritime security patrols in the international waters this week after Washington beefed up its Fifth Fleet. But this all appears to be improper. Scott?
Well, I think that's a good summary, Jim. We're wading into the insanity of John Bolton and the ineptitude of of Pompeo, and Robert David Steele does a good analysis of that in his letter. And you know, Trump asking for the phone call is a right move, of course, but the Iranians can be very, very prideful and in a sense not want to be perceived as weak and bowing to anything. So, you know, it may be a superior strategy for President Trump to pick up the phone himself and look and directly make contact and say, look, I'm not going to take the world to war, but I'm not going to allow my country to be threatened. I'm not going to allow us to be attacked. And that being said, I don't think you want to attack the United States. No one wants a war. So let's set up diplomatic conversations. Let's set up step-by-step initiation of diplomatic conversations, like he did with North Korea. He's got, perhaps being the bigger man and taking the the bold, aggressive, confident step of initiating a phone call in a communication with Iran, and perhaps even doing it with Russia. You know, if you're going to be a statesman, if you're going to be a diplomat, it requires both a sense of humility and in that humility is great strength and confidence. And when you have the truth on your side, when you have goodness on your side, when you have hope for peace and prosperity and stability, people sense that in your heart. They sense that in your voice, and it penetrates and it goes through all the barriers of prejudice and fear and all of the things that Trump has to deal with, because this is a long-standing hostility and distrust that has come since 1953. This is not recent. This is 53, and then you've got 79, and then you've got the long wars brewing and quiet in Iraq and Iran, and then you've got Saudi Arabia and all this. This is a schizophrenic nightmare in many regards. And the only way to solve that is through calm, peaceful, non-threatening action. And honestly, Jim, I see Russia being the only adult in the room, not China. China is the parasitic manipulator who calculates, they do only what they get more in return for doing. Their Belt and Road Initiative and all their economic development and all of that is designed to absorb the world and digest it as much as they can. They have no spiritual notions. The Communist Chinese Party is a devouring blob, and only the hope is Russia, the Christian Orthodox people of Russia, the former Soviet blocs, because they have the sense of sanity and gravity and depth that Europe has lost because of the political correctness plague. That's the new bubonic plague in Europe and the United States. We've talked to people who've been over there, and they said this whole homosexual, transgender lunacy has permeated Europe as much as America. It doesn't exist in Iran. It doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in Russia. That's a healthy society because they haven't suffered that. Granted, present audiences are not afflicted with that either, it still is going to be casting America into a civil war. You already see that coming with the abortion debates. You already see it coming with the future 2020 election. So there's a lot of internal hostility that is destabilizing the United States. There's the military-industrial complex that wants to amplify its agenda. And the only hope Trump really has is leveraging new beginnings with Russia and Iran by being the big man in the room and saying, look, I'm not waiting for Pompeo or Bolton. The American people don't like them. They like me because I'm bold and because I can stand up at a microphone and say, you know what? I have been so sick and tired of the fake news and all this talk about war. We're not looking to go to war with Iran or Russia or anybody. So to put your hot minds at ease, I'm picking up the phone and I'm making a call and I'm setting the thing straight. The buck stops with me. Anybody have a problem with me picking up the phone and calling these people? You come talk to me. But I'm the leader of the United States of America, the commander-in-chief, and no one is going to die on my watch, and I'm going to reestablish relationship. And anybody who doesn't like it is a real traitor to the American Constitution, including the media and every Democrat that's spewing like stuck pigs. Jim?
Wow.
Okay.
Excellent, Scott. Excellent. There's so many points that he has made. One of the best is that Trump could take the initiative, humble himself on behalf of world peace, humble himself on behalf of the millions of Americans that want him to do what's right, that this is about the image of America not being a proud person or a proud nation that has broken so many covenants, promises, and treaties over the hundreds of years of our dealing with other people, that America wants a new era in America, an era of honesty and humility and graciousness, and shutting down the warmonger military-industrial complex, the MIC. Somebody's given that MIC to it. The issue is America has been and is being destroyed by war, and the military-industrial complex, largely owned by the Rothschild banks and those representing the Vatican. These greedy, parasitic organizations have been the driving force in turning our Congress and Senate into a really well-paid whorehouse that disgusts the American people. It disgusts other nations. The issue is Mr. Putin has oftentimes found the corrupt and made an open spectacle of them in his nation. So Scott is right. And China has always been an idolatrous, idol-worshipping, gold-worshipping, money-worshipping culture, and they cannot be trusted because, hey, they eat their own babies over there, and they're serving human flesh. And that's, if anybody wants to study that, it's evident. The evidence is there. These people will harvest the organs of political prisoners and make money because, as far as they're concerned, money is much more important than the value of men. So the issue for me is, I'm looking at the fact that Trump does have the upper hand. He could turn the bully pulpit into a pulpit of statesmanship. He could turn the pulpit that he's been given into a pulpit that truly represents something other than the greater Israel project, other than the 7 nations in 5 years, other than the Zionist Vatican plan for the New World Order and one world government, one world religion. He could do these things if he gets the grace he needs from God, if he humbles himself and cries out to God as an individual and said, I do not want to be manipulated by my financial backers, by Adelson and the other people, or my own son-in-law. I don't care that they are minting a coin with my face on it. Let them throw it in the garbage. I care about America. And when America sees this, they will rally behind him in ways that people cannot even imagine. This man was elected by the Americans, the real Americans, not the fake Americans, not the fake news. He was elected by real Americans, and they want a real American to stand up in their name and protect our military from being pushed into another war, so that the process that has always been promoted by the Vatican of getting rid of the best and the brightest and leaving many children without fathers or mothers, that this process must stop. Stop the wars and stand up in the name of a true peace, not a peace that is going to sacrifice Americans even in other ways by continuing to yield to the processes produced by the world banks, the central banks, and our Federal Reserve. We need to stop the bankrupting of America morally, financially, and militarily. Thanks, James.
Wow, that's really good.
Beijing backs Iran, firmly opposes unilateral U.S. sanctions. I think there's no doubt that if the United States were to attack Iran, that Russia and China would come to the defense of Iran. The effect would be, among others, that Israel would be turned into the world's largest sheet of glass. In the latest sign of Beijing's frustration with the U.S., the Chinese leadership has reiterated its opposition to American sanctions against Iran. After a meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi reiterated Beijing's firm opposition to unilateral U.S. sanctions against Iran. In Mr. Zarif's visit to China, he will meet his Chinese counterpart, part of a longer trip that includes other key economic partners, Russia, Japan, and India. Comes amid growing tensions between Washington and Tehran, which spiked over the last week when the U.S., citing unspecified intelligence, actually a rumor promoted by the Mossad, which Bolton and Pompeo leaped upon to justify this ridiculous claim of Iranian threats. The U.S. Deployed an aircraft carrier bomber task force and other personnel to the Middle East. Meanwhile, economic doom. China says there'll never be a trade deal until the U.S. agrees to their demands. Unless someone backs down in a major way, this trade war is going to last for a very long time. The Chinese have made it exceedingly clear they're never going to back down on the core issues. The only way out, therefore, is for Trump to back down. With an election looming in 2020, his advisors are telling him now is the time to be tough with China. Bernie Sanders and other Democrats have staked out position just as tough on China as Trump. So if he backs down now, he'll be absolutely hammered by the other side for being weak. But if investors become fully convinced a protracted trade war is in our future, that could be enough to set off a new financial crisis, including a tailspin for the stock market and throw the global economy into a tailspin. It looks as though we're headed for major economic downturn anyway. So the trade crisis could be more than enough to push us over the edge. China has named its trade deal price as Trump sets a deadline. In a wide-ranging interview with Chinese media after talks in Washington ended Friday, Vice Premier Li He said that in order to reach an agreement with the U.S., must remove all extra tariffs, set targets for Chinese purchases of goods in line with real demand, and ensure that the text of the deal is balanced to ensure the dignity of both nations. Those are their three demands. Liu's three conditions underscore the work still to be done if an accord is to be reached between the two world's largest economies. Trump's administration has told China it has a month to seal a trade deal or face tariffs on all of its exports. That threat was made during talks Friday in Washington, hours after Trump upped the ante by imposing a second round of punitive duties on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. This is quite a significant development. Scott.
Well, you know, Michael J. hit a very good point that I can confirm. I've spoken personally with the people at the Epoch Times who are former, and not former, but a lot of them are Falun Gong practitioners. A lot of them have been promoting the Shen Yun dance musical theatrical presentation. I'm sure some people have seen. Shen Yun is the Chinese cultural musical dance show that is all acted out and participated in by free Chinese people, Falun Gong people and others, but they have escaped Chinese Communist Party control. They fled to America, and ironically, the Chinese are desperate to try and crush and destroy them and eliminate them because they're the threat to the Chinese Communist Party, the real Chinese culture, the real Chinese people. And they suffer horrifying, and their families suffer horrifying impacts. They do have their organs harvested. They're thrown in jail, and people who want livers or things like that, they go over and they pay $100,000 and they get a liver harvested out of the Falun Gong prisoners. And when I was in Washington, I saw the photographs, and I saw all of their protestations. The Chinese Communist government is responsible too for the alienation of the United States and Russia back in the 1970s and beyond. The Chinese Communist government is a very insidious, tactical, strategical, manipulative, diabolical system that lures and seduces people who are easy to lure and seduce, specifically Democrats and godless fools like that, lures them with money, lures them with power and all sorts of other intoxications in exchange for devouring slowly their society, their natural resources. Dianne Feinstein, Chinese communist spy. All of the people who came out of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, all of them Chinese communist foreign agents at their heart. And the Chinese who ruled Chinatown in San Francisco, this woman who's just died recently, it is filthy rich with Chinese communist propaganda and people. Chinese communist flags fly around San Francisco. I've seen them. So their ambitions on a global scale do not differ from what they do internally in the United States. They're responsible for a lot of the erosions culturally too in the U.S. So what China is doing, of course, seems to be walking around picking up the shrapnel and the damage which American bellicose policy and diplomacy has been yielding, and the crushing of these civilizations and the intimidation of the world and the scaring of nations like Africa, Iran, and Syria and elsewhere. They're all running for shelter, and who is providing the convenient shelter of a rice-skinned umbrella, if you will, or parasol? It's the Chinese with their dragon claws and their insidious smile and their promise for peace and prosperity. We're driving them into the arms of China. That's precisely what Putin warned about when he came over to Europe many years ago. When I remember when he met with business leaders in Europe, and he said, Russia is not the threat. China is the threat. China is the real danger. So Putin knows that. And Trump should know that he can unite and ally with Putin to offset China. And he probably could do the same thing with Iran. But it has to come from a desire to recognize and accept a multipolar world, not a unipolar world. There is no way that the United States people or Treasury can dominate and rule the world like a Roman Empire. That's not going to happen. The American people don't want this, and this experiment has degraded our ability to even function as a nation. So he has to recognize that Russia and Iran and Syria and even the European Union is breaking up. So you're going to have a recalibration of all of Europe. And Rumsfeld was right when he said there's a new Europe, and that is the former Soviet countries. So the whole world needs to be allowed to glacially recombobulate itself and not be so hysterically controlled by U.S. military industrial complex war policy, or else China is going to continue to walk around, pick up the pieces of the buildings that we've destroyed, and build their own Tower of Babel. Jim?
Michael J.
Wow.
Excellent, excellent, Scott. You know, China was created, as was Russia, by the deep state and the Rothschild-controlled banks in America that were brought in with the Federal Reserve under Mr. Wilson. The reality is we betrayed the Tsar and sent over Bolsheviks, that is Ashkenazi Antichrist Bolsheviks, into Russia, bringing on the real Holocaust in the after the First World War, rather, or during the First World War. We brought that on, and 66 million Russians were killed by Bolsheviks, financed by the United States State Department and the Federal Reserve. And we did the same thing to China when we betrayed Chiang Kai-shek. It was the globalist deep state in America that raised up Mao Zedong, with the help of the Skull and Bones under the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, Prescott Sheldon Bush. And the issue is we have caused the real Holocausts in America, from America rather. And we have caused the Holocaust in Southeast Asia with 2 million Vietnamese killed and many more wounded and maimed and crippled, and with multiple babies that were born mutated because of the Agent Orange and things like that. But then that spread over to Cambodia and Pol Pot, killing 6 million more. There's another Holocaust that America, deep state, has caused. We're praying that Mr. Trump is an answer, that he is someone that part of a standard being raised up to reverse this. Okay, to reverse what was done in Libya by the deep state under Obama and Hillary Clinton and NATO, the NATO Nazis, to reverse those things that were done in Somalia. We want Mr. Trump to actually start putting down the AFRICOM control of Africa so that our deep state multinational corporations can stop and will be forced to stop confiscating other nations' resources. Why is this so, I'm sorry, I've lost for words. Why is this so difficult for people to understand? Well, for one thing, promoting Mr. Trump as a person that's going to continue the military-industrial complex and the empire building is not working because the people of America elected him so he would stop this. We want you to stop it, Mr. Trump. We need you to start appealing to the American people in ways where you're giving them more of a voice. We encourage you with respect to your pushback against the censoring of our social platforms. And by the way, as Scott was pointing out, the social media, with the help of Google and other people that are filled with technocratic sociopaths, helping China set up their social credit system to disenfranchise people that speak out. And hey, if they really speak out, they go to the gulags over there and get their organs harvested. The issue is China is the real threat, and we need to understand that Iran could be brought over into the American realm instead of finding all their comfort in China, which would be a bad thing, Mr. Trump. So when we see you start acting like the president, I'll start calling you Mr. President Trump. Jim,
let me say one thing real quick too on the Chinese market. The simple rationale is the Chinese market is all the U.S. The U.S. is the entire Chinese market. So Trump sees absolute control and leverage. You have no one else to sell your stuff to. So I'm going to put tariffs on to charge you 25% on everything because I'm the only game in town. And to a certain extent, that's right. That's true. But the other side is for the past 50 years, we have financed China's military-industrial complex. We've financed with our money to them their entire South China Sea island building. The United States money, by being the #1 market for Chinese goods, has financed its Belt and Road and its military-industrial complex activities. So we've created the Frankenstein that we're now trying to control, and we can to a certain extent, but that's why China is looking to disconnect from the U.S. because we're its entire market. Our time is short. Jim?
Nice points. Yeah. Meanwhile, the media shameful handling of Bolton's Iran threat claim recalls a run-up to the Iraq War. Media-savvy U.S. government officials, political operatives, and lawmakers and their staffs from all political parties and ideological persuasions have no doubt throughout the history of our great country duped a fair-minded but unwitting reporter into writing a juicy story in order to get a piece of information into the public bloodstream without their fingerprints on it. Instead of expressing skepticism about such a statement from someone who's been gunning for war with Iran for nearly 2 decades, from an administration been doing the same for the past 2.5 years, reports from U.S. mainstream media outlets basically served as a public relations service, simply repeating Bolton's statement with little scrutiny across multiple mediums. For example, this was a headline from CNN. The U.S. deploying carrier and bomber task force in response to troubling Iranian actions. Much of the piece repeated almost verbatim administration claims about the supposed threat. It wasn't until the 24th paragraph that story noted such deployments are routine, that the carrier group in question, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Force, had already been deployed to the Central Command region, as Bolton put it in his statement. If the Lincoln Group had already been deployed, was Bolton, again, who has made no secret he wants war with Iran, simply using this routine matter to goad Iran into some kind of conflict? CNN asked no such questions. Then there's the question of the intelligence itself. Was it accurate? Was John Bolton, who also has a well-documented history of manipulating intelligence for his own policy preferences, playing fast and loose with the facts? There's really no doubt about it. Meanwhile, U.S. military complex is a malignant virus that's evolved to defend itself. Andrew Coburn, the U.S. military-industrial complex has grown into a self-sustaining organism with an immune system that attacks and smothers any threat to its food supply, the taxpayers' money. Coburn outlines a process that allows U.S. defense contractors to thrive despite repeatedly missing deadlines and overpricing subpar equipment. The system has evolved to be very good at defending itself while leaving the country, in reality, so poorly defended. He writes in his latest in Harper's, the military-industrial virus, how bloated defense budgets gut our armed forces. Coburn, his 40 years of experience, includes numerous books and publications on the U.S. military complex, its foreign wars and adversaries, looks at the current state of America's armed forces, from the overpriced disaster, that is the F-35 fighter, the few dilapidated minesweepers, to faulty personal protection and radios American soldiers are equipped with, compares it to the exorbitant defense bills a taxpayer has to fit. The MIC is embedded in our society to such a degree it cannot be dislodged, and also that it could be said to be concerned exclusively with self-preservation and expansion like a giant malignant virus. The system's beauty, he points out, lies in its self-reinforcing nature. Every new system, weapon, or piece of equipment costs up to twice as much as the one it's built to replace, and is often either plagued by bugs that have to be fixed for additional money, or is straight up worse than the predecessor. Busted deadlines and post-rollout fixes then inflate the costs even further, lining the defense contractors' pockets. With this in mind, defense spending has been growing at a steady rate since World War II. Then when there's talk of slashing that growth, a perceived threat emerges that justified bumping it back up. This was the case with a fraudulent specter of the missile gap with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, or the war with Iran. The opposition to the exorbitant spending among Washington's politicians is muted and misdirected, Coburn writes. Even those against it, like Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, tend to focus on the misuse of our military power, not the apparent fact its use is driven first and foremost by MIC revenues, not the other way around. Donald Trump's recent attempt to reduce the growth of defense spending by proposing a $700 billion budget for 2020 was an aberration, quickly corrected to $750 billion. Colburn's arguments ring true, especially as Washington gears up for a standoff with Iran, sending warships, nuclear-capable bombers, and reportedly preparing a 120,000-strong force for a possible Middle East showdown. He points to the absence of military parades in the U.S., but what's a parade in terms of showcasing military might and the money at work, compared to a live-fire demonstration with an adversary on the receiving end? Meanwhile, nearly 100,000 Pentagon whistleblower complaints have been silenced. Our dear colleague, Scott Bennett, can address that as well. Scott.
Well, the greatest crime occurred, I think, when the military personnel who occupied the Pentagon failed to stand up and honor their oath to the Constitution that a missile had struck the Pentagon, not a 767 or a 57. There was no engines anywhere. There was no grading on the ground and the grass. There was no wings or luggage or bodies. There was nothing on the grass or on the walls of the Pentagon except a hole. And I saw it the following day with a big tarp covering that hole. So a plane could not have physically, scientifically impacted the Pentagon. I think Barbara Honegger has done the best job so far in analyzing that. And every military person that failed to stand up and say, this was not a plane, and anybody who says it was, is a liar or a fool, and both of which we will not tolerate in our ranks of the military and the government of the United States, because it will take us to war. And because they didn't stand up, we went to war. Because they didn't stand up, because the military people didn't stand up at the Pentagon and didn't blow the whistle loudly, we've went to war for 19 years. So the military personnel at the Pentagon should be the first ones that are charged, prosecuted, and shot for treason because of their treason against the American public. The whistleblower complaint that I filed on Shellgate with Brad Birkenfeld that involved Edward Snowden, that involved Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, we filed with the Secretary, Inspector General of the Secretary of the Defense of the Pentagon, Lynn Halbrook, and she received it, and she got it, and she did absolutely nothing with it. And we sent it to James Mattis. We sent it to General Michael Flynn. We sent it to the Armed Services Committee of the Senate and the House, the intelligence committees, and everything is documented. And they did absolutely nothing but condemn me for writing it. Senator Dianne Feinstein, the chairwoman of the House of the Senate Intelligence Committee, entered into a conversation with Senator Bill Nelson about me and put it up on Bill Nelson's website. So they are guilty of treason. It's documented, and they have failed to stand up. And by failing, they've committed treason, and they've caused the death of Americans. This is something that is now the standard operating procedure in the American oligarchy. We are not a republic anymore. We are an oligarchy with a schizophrenic, sycophantic media of metrosexual half-wit hermaphrodites that don't know what truth is at all. They just regurgitate what is given to them. And we have a political class that are empty, lobotomized child rapists or so addicted to the limelight that they are just actors. And we have a military that is mindlessly intoxicated with the notion of, I like the quote earlier, going to countries and liberating them and turning them into insane asylums and cemeteries. That's the new reality. That's the new paradigm shift. That's what Wesley Clark warned of. That's what Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us. And now we're in the twilight zone sunset of America's greatness because of the whirlwinds that we're now reaping. And I hope Trump is the solution and people stand up and reverse that. But it's not looking good if we're continuing this. And the arrest of Julian Assange and President Trump not having him in his Oval Office debriefing him, and Snowden the same way, to find out what really happened, to find out who in the CIA and the NSA and the DIA have lied to Trump. That's what he needs to do, is get firsthand intelligence from Bill Binney, from Ray McGovern, from Snowden, from Assange, from me, from Birkenfeld, all the people that were on the ground. And we'll give him the truth like he's never heard it before. Jim?
Michael.
Real quickly, I wanted to just say that you're seeing behind me evidence of what an airplane does to a tower when it hits. This is concrete evidence. This is the reason why we went to war, because of that airplane. Yes.
Well, Don, that wasn't an airplane, because an airplane would bounce off a building designed to withstand aircraft. And the issue is the lies that were promoted are being exposed. And what you see there in that picture is an explosion, not an impact.
Oh, really?
You know, the issue that I see is that the good news pulled out by this report on RT, nearly 100,000 Pentagon whistleblower complaints have been silenced. I want us to ask ourselves, how many of those 100,000, 100, 1,000, 10,000 reports were given that actually did expose what didn't happen to the Pentagon, and they were also silenced? The issue is what Scott is pointing out is the people that were higher up, the people that were in the chain of command receiving these whistleblower reports and then refusing to report them. These are the traitors. These are people complicit in mass murder and in genocide of millions of people in the Middle East, because they considered their career as what? Professional murderers? To be what it means to be in the United States military? These people are fools. The issue is, what we're looking at is real Americans, people that actually, not armchair sergeants and armchair colonels, but people that have been in the field, would never have gone for that if they saw what was going on. And how many tens of thousands of veterans have committed suicide because they were used and they were forced and ordered into doing despicable things in Iraq and in other places. And how many of them were allowed to die on Obama's watch because they couldn't even get decent care from the VA. What we're looking at is the American military that took an oath. That oath never goes away. You can ask Scott, you can ask anybody, Jim Fetzer or myself. The oath doesn't go away because it defined us, and it was further defining us when we saw people die around us in combat or even in training because of the strength of that oath. And then we look at the whorehouse Congress, who took the same oath and break it for money because they want to be whores for the military-industrial complex or for the Zionists. Why can't we have the First Amendment honored and make America first instead of making it a crime to criticize a genocidal apartheid state who has been promoting wars in America for what? For how long? Using the Rothschild banking system that came in 1913. The Zionists are the Rothschilds. And the reality of America electing a president that said we want to put America first, and then watching this president descend to being Mr. Trump because he's being ordered around by a bunch of sociopathic, narcissistic murderers. This is the shame of America, and the world sees it. We're tired of it, Mr. Trump. We need you to repent. Jim?
Thank you, Michael J. Well said. Well said. Meanwhile, Barr is reportedly working closely with the CIA to review the Russia probe origins. There's a lot going on here, pretty fascinating. Barr is reported to be working with CIA Director Gina Haspel, FBI Director Christopher Wray, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, on the interagency review. Barr told Congress in April he planned to form a team within the Justice Department to investigate whether the U.S. government improperly surveyed the Trump campaign. I think spying did occur, he told the Senate Appropriations Committee on April 10th. Yes, I think spying did occur, he repeated, but the question is whether it was adequately predicated. I'm not suggesting it wasn't, but I need to explore that. The probe is running parallel to a DOJ Inspector General's investigation about the warrants against campaign advisor Carter Page. Michael Horowitz is also reported investigating the SBI's use of confidential information about Christopher Steele and former Cambridge professor Stephen Halper. The FBI officially began its investigation on July 31st, 2016, after receiving information from the Australian government about George Papadopoulos, a Trump campaign advisor. We have further information. Who is John Durham, the man assigned to examine the origins of the Russia investigation? Attorney General William Barr reportedly assigned U.S. Attorney John Durham to investigate the origins. President Trump nominated Durham to his current position as Connecticut U.S. Attorney in 2017. He enjoys a bipartisan reputation and successful track record in investigating high-profile cases, including Whitey Bulger and CIA abuse of terrorism suspects. This is quite significant. Durham went after Connecticut street gangs in 1992, prosecuted mobsters in the Gambino, Genovese, and Patriarca crime families. He was responsible for exposing former Connecticut Governor John Rowland's corruption in 2004. Attorney General Janet Rito commissioned Durham to investigate the FBI's relationship with informant and Boston mobster Whitey Bulger in 1999. This team was responsible for indicting Bulger crony Stephen the Rifleman Fleming and Special Agent John Connolly Jr., who are portrayed in the film Black Mass. Durham also investigated the case at the request of former Attorney General Michael McCasey in 2008, involving videotapes the CIA had destroyed that depicted the torture of terrorism suspects. He further examined the CIA's handling of detainees at the request of former Attorney General Eric Holder and the Obama administration. We are confident Durham will continue this record of success in providing strong leadership to the office. He's earned an immense respect as a no-nonsense, fierce, and fair prosecutor, as observed Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy when they recommended him to Trump. Colleagues say Durham is thorough and cautious in deciding whether a case deserves to be prosecuted. I think he's a great choice. Meanwhile, here's a photograph that captures the Russian influence on the U.S. election. It's very clear this is the heart of the matter. This is the problem. There was a foreign nation influencing our elections, but it wasn't Russia. Scott.
Right. Yeah. I think now we're witnessing the reverse tide coming back out. They tried to unleash a tidal wave to destroy the edifice, the buildings of the Trump administration and everybody associated with it. And they only got so far till the Mueller report ran out, and they had all these other reports that also confirmed the Mueller report, And that set the limitation. They couldn't go any further. There was no Russian collusion. There was no Russian hacking into the DNC. Besides that, all of the investigations were completely corrupted. They didn't do anything that they should have done. Had it been a foreign intelligence agency, they would have grabbed the servers of the DNC by force and examined them, because they would have indicated a threat to the infrastructure of the United States. They never did that. It was most likely Seth Rich, as you've described before, getting the information to the conduit that got it to Julian Assange. Julian Assange testified with Sean Hannity in an interview and said Russia had nothing to do with this. Russia was not our source. They know that. All of that testimony, all of that evidence can be brought in, and it's now showing the American people that this was a coup. This was an attempt to overthrow a president of the United States. Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, James Comey, Bruce Orr, his wife Nellie Orr, all entering into a conspiracy to defraud the United States, to obstruct justice, to overthrow a president. I mean, people can get shot for treason for what they did, Jim, and they should be shot for treason. All of this was an attempt to throw out President Trump because they went into a maniacy, a schizophrenia, a meltdown. You saw that in these fanatics that were lighting cars on fire and defecating in the streets and crying and wailing like tantrum children in fetus positions, going to Hillary Clinton's party, crying on the news shows, these fools on MSNBC and NBC and all the other groups, crying and wailing and bellowing because they couldn't handle it. Well, you know what? Trump won, but they still tried to overthrow and stop all this. Russia just looked laughing. But sadly, the Republicans also pushed Trump into a position to further double down on the confiscation of Russian property and entered into this 2 years of Russian sanctioning and anti-Russian bellicosity. And then you've got the Syria episode. You've had all these things pushed on Trump, but now the shoe's on the other foot. He has the chance with Barr. He has the chance with the Inspector General. He has the chance with Durham. He has the chance for additional hearings of people like me and Brad Birkenfeld, Julian Assange, Snowden. In our little world of knowing the conspiracy and the cover-up, we can serve as the cornerstone for the disintegration of their whole house of cards. This was the first major crime in 2009. This is what Hillary Clinton covered up in her WikiLeaks, in her emails, 30,000 of them. The pay-to-play operation involving all the money that went to Obama, all the money that Robert Wolf, chairman of the Americas of Union Bank of Switzerland, facilitated, which Brad Birkenfeld knew, all of the CIA targeting of Birkenfeld, which Snowden knew, and I knew, and FBI counterintelligence reports shutting down Birkenfeld's 19,000 bank accounts. All of this stuff needs to come out. All of it indicates a greater crime, a Wheel of Fortune attitude towards the United States government. And I think it is now entering that stage. It's going to be really interesting in 2020. Trump can win if he sticks to the domestic policy exposure of the deep state and doesn't allow them to draw him into a distraction of war in China, Iran, or anywhere else, because a foreign war will destroy every good thing he's done domestically and every exposure of the deep state. So he has to focus on internal domestic America first. Go ahead, Jim.
Michael J., 3 minutes.
Thank you. Scott is making so many excellent points, and I just want to piggyback on a few of them. Barr is going to make a mess of the deep state, but the Democrats are very concerned in having a liar like Blumenthal give Barr his thumbs up is really a backhanded kiss of death. The reality is that's why when we had the person who, what was their name, that alcoholic underneath the Clintons that was running the show down there in Waco, when she was spouting about Janet Reno, when she was spouting about let's do this for the children. This was something so abusive, so offensive because of the hypocrisy of the murders that she facilitated under her watch. And so we're looking at Barr. We're looking at the amazing miracle of so many people in the media being exposed as deep state shills under Operation Mockingbird, and we're seeing that Trump has done an amazing job domestically in allowing the manifestations of the demonic personalities of the demonic rat party members and the corruption that's so obvious, because they are not actually taking care of the American people. They're promoting an agenda which is about destroying America, destroying her borders, and overthrowing the choices of the American people that they call deplorable. Jim?
Don, I'll let you take us out here. Say what you'd like to say, my friend.
Okay, well, first, I guess we have to recognize that when truth is politicized, all is lost. And you really can't believe a word that the media says. That's not me saying that. That's Paul Craig Roberts. He really knows what's going on and realizes that there is an awful lot of
Fake news.
out there. And we're controverting that. We're standing for the truth, and the truth is what's saving us. And I'm sure respect what you gentlemen are all saying this first hour of our show here on May 20th. And so stay tuned for the second part coming up here. The second hour will be coming very shortly. We thank you so much for watching. We want to share this widely, and I think it's the best information on the network. You tell me differently, but I like it. I think it's the best. Okay, here we go. Adios.